So if we can bring the hormones on earlier in the transition, it's what people would call the critical window. If we can bring it in earlier, it tends to be more helpful.
We have less brain shrinkage.
Yeah.
Well,
the brain shrinkage actually persists regardless. But we have
great.
But we get to think better.
Welcome to Modern Menopause by Parlor Games. I'm one of your hosts, Morven. I work for Parlor Games, and I'm here with my co-host, Dr. Robyn Kutka. She is our consulting physician and all-around expert on everything from hormones, saliva testing, and so much more. Now, on today's podcast, we're going to be tackling brain fog, memory changes, brain changes, and the ever frustrating symptom that many women experience, which is thinking that you have someone's name or thinking that you can remember what's on your grocery list, only to try and say it out loud and find that you just can't find the word. And you know that you know it, but you can't remember that person's name. You can't remember what you were about to say. You can't remember if you needed cilantro or basil and all that kind of fun stuff. And this is a pretty common thing that a lot of women, I would say, probably experience starting in perimenopause. It's often one of the first things that women start to notice, right, in the workplace. And it kind of comes with a cascade of other symptoms. Women will find themselves feeling distracted, frustrated, agitated. Perimenopause rage is actually pretty common. And I do wonder how related these two things are, because when you can't remember stuff, you feel like an idiot. You start to get mad. Pretty direct line. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Dr. Robyn. What's sort of happening to where our brains just seem to cease functioning for brief periods or
great question.
Prolonged periods?
Well, and you're absolutely right. This is one of, I think, the very first concerns that people start to notice. And even in the premenopausal years, like over 30% of women, depending on the research you look at, report struggling with this, and the number just climbs as we get to that perimenopausal and menopausal transition, especially early on. We attribute a lot of this to declining estrogen levels. There's probably more, and I'll get to that, but estrogen is probably the most well-studied of this. And when we have this drop in estrogen, we see actual changes in the brain. And this can be in different systems, like our what's called the dopaminergic system, the acetylcholine, super important for memory. We see changes there. We see increases in inflammation in the brain, and really changes in how things are transmitted. We even see a decrease in gray matter in the brain in postmenopausal women. That might be more due to aging, but it happens around the same time. So we actually see brain shrinkage. And, this is, I think, a really great example of where we're failing women in the workforce. We're like, oh, you're perimenopausal and postmenopausal, just go on and do the same work you did before. And I want everybody to be able to do that. But the fact is we're having these changes that physically affect us, and we have to make we should be making some accommodations for that, and at least acknowledging it so we know that it's normal instead of feeling
right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it does. I've started to notice, like, you forget the names of things, and it's not like a lack of knowledge. It's this weird, like, I can't recall that information immediately. It's just gone. It's like a weird blank where you know the answer to something, or you know someone's name, and you just can't access that information. It's like the door is locked, and it does. It makes you feel like you're going insane. Which I think is got to be tough for women if they're in an environment where that's not as forgiving, right? Like, I work remote, I'm at home at my desk. If I can't remember something, I'm going to clump around my house in a bad mood for a couple minutes until I figure it out. But if you're in an environment, where women are expected, you have to have the answer. Like, it's, you need that recall immediately.
You're a high performing.
Yeah. I imagine it's sort of putting women, like you say, on the back foot when it's not a moodiness. It's not like they're being difficult. It's their brains truly not working at the same level.
Well, one thing I want to point out too is it's not just affecting workforce or job performance and things, but in the family. If she's partnered with someone or, has kiddos or whatever. And I hope for all these women that are experiencing this, that they have somebody who's really supportive, but that's not always the case. And I definitely work with women who have been told by their partners, they think they're making it up and what's wrong with you. And this is an actual thing that's happening. This is not like I'm just too tired to remember the word, or something like that. But, along those lines, with these other symptoms with menopause, if a woman's not sleeping really well or her anxiety is heightened, that's going to impact this. It's going to act like a, megaphone to make this particular concern worse. And a lot of women will go through this and think, oh my gosh, is there something wrong? Do I have dementia? Like, is it early onset? What's happening? And what I usually tell women is, if it's happening during the same time that we're, starting to get hot flashes, sleep disturbances, mood changes, period changes, or right at, into the first 1 or 2 years of menopause, it's not likely dementia. It's not Alzheimer's, anything like that. It actually is the effects of these hormone changes on, on our neurotransmitters, on our actual neurons, on the brain itself.
Well, you mentioned something else there, right, which was anxiety. And so there's other stuff going on for women in this phase of life, which are likely, it's a two-way street. They're having mood changes, they're having sleep changes, they're having hot flashes, which right? They impact your ability to function for executive functioning, they impact brain function, and vice versa. Brain function is going to impact your mood. It's going to impact, you're stressing out, you're worried about things, and so it's going to impact your sleep. This is something that, we discussed a little bit before this podcast started, is I see a lot of women in my practice who are coming in saying, I feel like I'm struggling with depression. I feel like I'm struggling with anxiety. Mm-hmm. I feel like I'm struggling with ADHD. And they can't tell if they had these things before and they were just able to kind of white knuckle through them and manage it, right, or if this is a new symptom. And there's quite a lot of studies that are starting to come out that back this up, right, where we're saying, hey, we're seeing this massive increase in women in perimenopause, in menopause, with an increase in mental health concerns. What's sort of your take on that? Because I'm sure you're seeing some of the same stuff where women are coming in and it's just all roads lead to Rome, right? They're trying to figure out an answer to what's going on.
Yeah. Honestly, if women can get their hormones tested in saliva testing, we've talked about that before, but if women can do saliva hormone testing and see what's going on and address it, use that as the roadmap, and optimize estrogen levels, optimize progesterone levels, and anything like that to help support the brain. Even testosterone is starting to be studied for cognitive function. So whatever we can do to support those levels, especially earlier in our transition. So we know that we have changes to the brain just like as a function of aging itself, but these hormonal shifts during the perimenopausal and early menopausal years, if we can address those as they're happening early on, then we can help get some of that cognition back and delay some of those changes. Addressing what's going on head on. Mm-hmm.
Well, walk me through some of the role, I guess, that these hormones have in the neurotransmitters and on that kind of stuff, because I'm curious, if we dive into the science a wee bit, okay, what is estrogen's role in those neurotransmitters? Progesterone, right? You mentioned testosterone. What's sort of happening when women are, okay, I go get my saliva test. I'm sick of struggling at Jeopardy. I go get my saliva test. My hormones are all out of whack. I start taking my hormones. What are we kind of looking at for expected neurotransmitter changes with hormone support?
So neurotransmitters are chemicals in the brain, right? And we think of them for mood support, and they're there, but they're also there for helping us with our cognition, with our word recall. They even help us with weight and temperature and things like that. So hormones can help the production, the availability, and the sensitivity of the receptors, or even how the receptors use neurotransmitters. So as we start to see a change, and estrogen's the most well-studied for this, but as we see a change or a decline in those levels, then we can see a decrease in neurotransmitter levels and in how our brain can use it. Estrogen is known to be what we call neuroprotective, so protective, like an antioxidant almost, and neurotropic, so it can actually help build those neurotransmitters. We think of serotonin, but in memory, I think more about acetylcholine, the dopamine system, and inflammation. So estrogen's really important for that. We see testosterone starting to be studied for it as well. And so we can see some resources that support the use of testosterone. It's dependent. What's interesting is we don't have a lot of studies on this as far as testosterone goes, and it's not like the same across the board on how much is used, when it's introduced, who gets to use it, that kind of thing. So the studies don't always have the same results on testosterone, but it's promising. And I can say clinically what I see in my patients is progesterone helps a ton. I think we have even less studies on progesterone. Progesterone is just really thought to be out there to help protect the uterus, right? But we know it has so many other functions. And I definitely see a lot of resolution of like a typical brain fog when women are using that. Maybe because it's helping to promote sleep, but I think we're doing more on a global effect there too. So we see these modulations of neurotransmitters and protection of our neurons with hormone use. And so when that goes away, and then we have the aging brain and the decrease in gray matter that can go with that, and it compounds into these concerns that we're seeing. So if we can bring the hormones on earlier in the transition, it's what people would call the critical window. If we can bring it in earlier, it tends to be more helpful.
We have less brain shrinkage.
Yeah.
Well,
the brain shrinkage actually persists regardless. But we have
great.
But we get to think better. But what we see is like even if we don't use hormones, these cognitive concerns typically kind of even out in the postmenopausal years. Like I have a lot of women come to me because we're so much talk about estrogen and cognition and brain protection. A lot of talk about that on social media and things. So people will come now to my office where 5 years ago they didn't do this. And they'll come in and say, I want estrogen for my brain health. That's the reason they want it. Well, they're 9 years post-menopause. We've kind of missed that window.
Yeah, like you say, it's one of these things where it feels like women are, and I know you and I have talked about this, right? But it's certainly one of the frustrating things is that because some of the symptoms of perimenopause and menopause are like survivable, that we just let them happen. Like you're saying, like poor sleep, right? We just let it happen. Or women struggling in the workplace and they're kind of, I mean, I've had it happen where, and it's such a bizarre feeling where you're like, I know the answer or I know that person's name, and it's like a black hole where your brain should be filling in that information. But we're just like, yeah, it's not that bad though. It's not like you can't function. It's not like you can't speak. It's not like you're bleeding to death. So just tough it out. But obviously from what you're saying, it's saying, actually, no, that is really bad. We should be kind of treating these as more seriously on some level and saying, okay, it sounds like something's going on here. It sounds like your hormones are imbalanced. And, maybe there's other things going on. So, always worth getting these things checked out. But it's kind of sad to think, right, that women are experiencing this. For those of our ladies listening, if this is something that you have experienced, we'd love to hear from you. Be sure to comment underneath our podcast. If it sounds like something that you think other women could benefit from, be sure to share this episode with them, because I think it is a really disorienting experience for a lot of women. And they often get told like, yeah, this is just feel like an idiot for a couple years. Just don't sleep. Feel like an idiot.
Normal.
Be moody. You're like you'll deal with it. And obviously the bulk of women just do. That's the crazy part is that we do. However, we don't. We are going to answer some questions from our ladies who don't want to just deal with it, who want to kind of manage this stuff. Again, if you're listening and you have questions for Dr. Robyn, you can always comment underneath our podcast and we will maybe feature you on one of our other episodes if it's, relevant to something that we're talking about. If you think that there's other people who might benefit from these episodes, be sure to share them with the friends, the other women in your life. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss one. But we are going to dive into a couple of questions that we have that were sent in. Are you ready?
Yeah, got my pen, got some paper.
And this one's probably going to open a can of worms because it's about ADHD. So yeah, it's a 2-for-1. I have self-diagnosed myself with ADHD. I couldn't hold attention even if it had handles on it. And lately I realize I sporadically interrupt people when we are talking. At first, it felt like I just had to say it before I forgot my train of thought. But it feels more and more impulsive and I absolutely hate it. My ability to focus on one thing is almost impossible. It's hard to get motivation and I'm quick to lose it. I've never had anything this significant. My question is, since this is very possibly due to perimenopause, and I really don't want to start an onslaught of pills to make it through this, as I'm hoping it will one day level out on its own, is there something I can do naturally, a supplement, an exercise, an app, or something else?
I love this. I think there's a little bit of all the above available. And she's not alone. I see this a lot. My clinical practice focuses on hormone balancing. So when women come to me with this, that's the first thing we do is we work on hormones, hormone replacement therapy when indicated. So we support estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. We look at cortisol and stress, things along those lines, and we see how far we get with that. We can also support key nutrients. So we talked a lot about neurotransmitters already. Neurotransmitters don't just need hormones. They need certain nutrients to be made and utilized and even broken down efficiently or effectively. So I think about vitamin D. That's the first step for our main neurotransmitters. And a lot of us live so far north of the equator that our bodies we can't make that vitamin D very well. The angle of the sun isn't enough. There's not enough sun out exposure, things like that. So vitamin D is kind of the rate limiting step for some of these. And then iron, B12, folate, B6, even magnesium in some cases. So these are things that we want to make sure we're not lacking in, or what I call key nutrients, alongside hormone therapies. So if we're supporting our hormones and those, usually for when it happens like this, what I see clinically is women start to feel better. They start to bring some of that, cognition back, or it's easier to focus, a lot of that. But sometimes it persists, and sometimes women really have been just kind of masking it and coming up with their own ways to cope, their own mechanisms, and then perimenopause makes that impossible, or menopause and makes that impossible, and it comes to light at that point. And that's where seeing somebody who can diagnose that and help them treat with medication if they want to. It sounds like this person doesn't. There is a supplement that is used quite often for this, especially in kids. So L-theanine is an amino acid that we think about oftentimes for like anxiety and stress management, for helping with the feelings of calm. But it can, especially when it's coupled with caffeine. So like a cup of green tea, something like 200 to 500 milligrams is really common for L-theanine with caffeine can help with focus. So that's something that I actually often use that a lot in my patient population as a quick fix, so to speak, like something to try for, the first part of the day. It tends to be on our system for short time, something like 4 to 6 hours, depending on the person. So, it's not an all day thing or anything, but that can help a lot with focus for some people too. Yeah. Exercise, of course. Do you know any apps? I'm sure they're out there.
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch. It would sort of depend on what they want the app to do. Like there's apps for time management. There's apps for building good habits. There's mindfulness apps. There's motivation apps that essentially use like reward. They kind of use DBT, CBT style, like short-term rewards. Like you'll get points for doing things, and you can put in like, okay, when I get this number of points, I get a massage or whatever. So it's essentially like creating these little dopamine hits of like, okay, I've got 5 stars and I need 15 or whatever. There's a bunch of apps like that. I'm trying to think of the names of them. I would say, in this situation, it sounds like, she's losing her train of thought. She's feeling over impulsive. She's lost motivation. Looking up DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy techniques. They have a ton of techniques based on this stuff, where it's, helping kind of control the flow of thoughts, helping, get emotions under control, which I'm sure is part of this. I don't think it's any one thing.
Right.
Mindfulness, I would say, is actually a huge one here. I think that, I always have a hard time with clients when I'm like, hey, some people just hate to meditate. They hate the idea of meditating. They think it sounds bad. So I always try and suggest like mindfulness as, can you pay attention while you're doing the dishes? Attention is kind of a muscle in some ways. And we tend to voluntarily give up our attention when we're doing things we don't like. I'm not going to pay attention when I'm doing dishes. I'm not going to pay attention when I'm doing laundry. I'm not going to pay attention when I'm driving. And then when we want to use our attention span, we often find it more challenging. And so one of the good things about mindfulness is sort of, can I pay attention when I'm washing the dishes? Can I pay attention to the temperature of the water, the feel of the bubbles, the sounds that I can hear?
Right.
And it's actually really beneficial. And obviously there's tons of apps for meditation, for breathing. There's tons of apps for mindfulness. But I would say it's definitely something that, however people find that mindfulness. I know I have clients who find it through prayer. I have clients who find it through using like Calm. I have clients who find it through yoga. That's also a big one to kind of help your brain and your cognition a lot more than you realize.
Yeah, we work on that a lot, as it's in a lot of my treatment plans too.
Yeah, but it's a tough sell because I think sometimes people have this idea of like you're going to be sitting for 20 minutes just breathing, and that's not how it has to be. You know, people can do walking meditation, they can do a bunch of different types of things.
Sitting, like one example I use a lot of times is like just sit in your chair and look out the window and count the leaves. How many leaves do you see? How many different colors do you see? What else do you actually see in the trees? Are there birds there? You know, because we're so used to just being on autopilot. And if we do a mindfulness technique like that, where we're just focusing on one of our senses and bringing us back to the present and actually being there, it's like that exercise of that muscle, like you mentioned.
Yeah. So I would say that's an interesting one for sure. Okay. Different question here, kind of switching tack. Is there a difference between brain fog? I'm going to say brain frog like 10 times. I'm sure before the rest of this episode is over. It's there. That's what's in my head. Is there a difference between brain fog from long COVID and perimenopause?
I would say yes. I mean, they might feel the same. That's an interesting question. You know, brain fog can come with long COVID, but the reason is different, right? It's the effects of the virus and maybe inflammation, potentially reactivating another virus in the body, something like that, versus the reason behind brain fog and perimenopause is our altered hormone levels, or our changing hormone levels. In long COVID, you know, it's not something that I treat or am super knowledgeable about. But in long COVID, that length of brain fog could vary, versus in perimenopause, we think about the brain fog maybe still being present, but at least evening out within a few years of that menopausal transition. Typically, the length and the reason behind it may vary. And of course, how we would address it. If somebody had brain fog from long COVID and we address it through, you know, hormone shifts, unless the hormone shifts are the cause, it's probably not going to help.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I imagine that's the stressful thing for women as well, right? Because I think there's a lot of women who probably have such poor sleep that that's actually the bigger problem. And that's like you're saying, there's so much stuff going on that it can be hard for women to treat it. And that's honestly the same thing that we see with anxiety, depression, and ADHD. We get a ton of women in perimenopause, menopause coming in, and it's hard to kind of pinpoint where the first domino or dominoes are to really deal with. Yeah.
My own experience with this, like I had COVID early on, and I'm currently perimenopausal. So my first experience with COVID, like I completely forgot that a coworker got married. That's not something that was COVID. That was not perimenopause. And, you know, 2 months later we had this conversation. I was like, what, you got married? I mean, it was this gaping whole of a memory, versus in perimenopause, it's more like, I know the word and it starts with a D and I can describe everything around it. Can somebody please help me find the word that starts with a D? You know, it's like,
I was playing Jeopardy, and I love Jeopardy. Like my whole family loves Jeopardy. I would say I'm pretty damn good at Jeopardy. And I was like, I know the country. I can tell you where the country is on a map. I can tell you the shape of the country. And it was
it's wild, huh? Yeah. So I think like that my suspicion is though both of them might have brain fog, they feel a little bit different, you know?
Right. Nice. Okay, here's a good one. I'm more worried about my brain than anything else and how frequently it fails me nowadays, and the hot flashes.
Ooh.
What can I do?
Support hormones. I mean, that's the cause behind what's going on here. And we actually know, I think there's some studies with women with more severe hot flashes or longer duration of hot flashes being at a higher risk of dementia and Alzheimer's later in life.
Severity.
Severity?
I think it's severity.
I think it's severity too. But I think they count the severity as the number per day or something like that.
Right.
So anyway, they're linked. So are hot flashes and cardiovascular disease. Just because it's only hot flashes, I'm not saying that's this person, but others might ignore it's just hot flashes, I'll write it out. But it really isn't just hot flashes. It could be indicative of more, or insulin resistance even, and things like that.
Okay, here's a good one with a good example. I mean, we've kind of answered this a wee bit, but it's still a good one to kind of touch on. I went to the grocery store today and I got to the self-checkout and scanned my item and then just walked away without paying. It dawned on me that I hadn't paid and I had to walk back to the register. I know that you guys have spoken about progesterone being helpful for brain fog, but I'm wondering what's actually happening to cause that fog.
So with progesterone itself, like I said, clinically, we can see this helping. I quite often see women reporting better cognition when they're using it. It's not super well studied. So I don't have a mechanism behind progesterone besides potentially being like neuroprotective, calming the excitatory neurotransmitters, and just being more calming in general. But we know that, when we're thinking about hormones in general, estradiol, testosterone, progesterone, they're protective to our little brain cells, and they're helping our big brain cells, protective to our big brain cells. They're helping with our neurotransmitters. They're helping with connection. Think of it as like little bridges. So they're helping us make those bridges, and even helping with actual memory and neuroplasticity, I'm sure. So there's a lot going on here. Inflammation, like we talked about before, they're protective against that. But estrogen is the most studied for this versus our other ones. Mm-hmm.
Well, it's really interesting. I was telling Dr. Robyn before we hopped onto this podcast that I'm reading a book all about this right now. It's all about neurology and the brain. Mm-hmm. And he talks about it like our brain is, it's people who used to, when they were studying the development of the brain, right? There's this soup and then there's also electrical currents. And so we think of electrical currents as the conversation that the neurons are having, but the soup is all the neurotransmitters. And so you think, right, like if your soup is suddenly really watery, they don't have as much stuff to use, and they really need this soup. And so that's what he talks about, and he talks about how the brain changes when it ages, and it's harder to build new neural pathways. Mm-hmm. It's not impossible, but it is much harder. We have less plasticity, we have less neuron development, we have much better pruning, so our pathways are much more efficient, but we do have less kind of growth and development, except with memories. With memories, we tend to see that it continues. But he talks about it in the sense of like the soup. If the neurotransmitters are getting less, if there's less of them, there's less stuff in the soup, and the soup is like what's kind of around. It's pretty interesting because he talks about famous cases throughout history. It's a great book, but yeah, and that's sort of what he talks about is different mental health disorders or different stuff going wrong in the brain. And one of the things that he talks about is it's not just when the neurons get separated or the electrical things go wrong. It's also when stuff goes wrong with the soup. Well, I think that's about all that we have time for today with questions. For anyone listening, we're so glad that you guys are tuning in to the Modern Menopause podcast. If you enjoyed it, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Be sure to share it with other women in your life. There are plenty of women who struggle with these things and they don't have people to talk about it with. They don't know where to find answers. Hopefully they can find us and get a little bit more clarity on this stuff. We know it's a confusing and challenging time for a lot of women, and there's not a ton of information out there. So be sure to share it with the other women in your life. Be sure to hit subscribe, and we hope that you'll listen next time.
See you next time, ladies.